collapse lung.
Yeah, fast forward to the collapse lung. So yeah, so like as Warren says, when I started doing the Invisibles, and it became, I thought I'll really treat this as a magical work, and I'll shave my head and I'll change places with the main character in the sense that I went to, if he was in Australia, I would go to Australia. If he was doing a bungee jump, I would go do a bungee jump. If he was taking a particular drug, I would take the drug. If he was going out with a girl, I would find the girl. So I was kind of trying to exchange my life with his characters. Then made the mistake of giving him a collapsed lung, and he's tortured in a dentist chair by madmen. And within, you know, he basically told there's a virus eating his face. Within 3 months, I've got a virus eating my face. The scar is still there. I was in hospital with collapsed lungs, 2 days from death. And basically I thought, okay, this is working. this voodoo comics idea is really working. And then gave the character a fantastic time and sexy girlfriends, and all of this suddenly poured into my own life to weird various degrees, and it taught me a lot about how not to
I just remember the first I knew about this, I bumped into Frank quietly at a convention, and I said, have you seen Grant? Is Grant coming? And Frank said, I don't know, he might be dead. And when he said it in that tone of voice, he said, that might not actually stop him from turning up.
So yeah, so I mean, I still do All-Star Superman was a particular kind of magic working, and the new stuff I'm doing, this new book, Nameless, with Image, is a super dark thing where I've been exploring a lot of this Luciferic and Setian magic and the tunnels of Set and all that kind of stuff. So it's really dark, occult. But yeah, I mean, I still, to me, it's the work is the magic. It's now become the same thing. It's how I do the practice.
Right before Grant turns into Lucifer beside me. Thank you.
Too late.
I like this one. Shift it away a little bit.
Just going to bring it back to superheroes, just because that's the title of it. Yeah, I know. With the huge success of superhero films and that kind of transition, superhero comics always succeeded because you could draw stuff that you could never afford to put on the screen at the time. Now technology's caught up and you can do all of that. Do you think that superheroes' life within that medium, within the comics medium, is shortened because of that? And is it going to transcend purely into cinema, where it can do sound and movement and those sorts of things?
It can do sound and movement, but it can't ever be more than 2 hours long. It's small stories on a bigger page. And I think ultimately people show up for the stories as well as the scale. And a movie can never be more than a palimpsest of the kind of story you can tell on paper.
Yeah, and what comics do so well, and although television's now learned from comics, but comics do the extended narrative so well, and they've been doing it for so long, they got really good at it. You know, you can follow Cyclops' life for 40 years, and things change, and he meets new people, and it has an effect. So I think that extended narrative, you can spend so much time in a character's life, is much more sticky than anything movies.
The interesting thing, actually, will be see how Marvel handle the series they're doing at Netflix, which is much more that novelistic pace of like 13 hours at a time, times 4, because they're doing 4 of them. Plus, I think they're bookending it with something. That will be interesting to watch, to see if they actually go for novelistic television, which is a very different beast to broadcast network or episodic television. If they go for the full novelistic House of Cards thing, that will be interesting. That might put us out of a gig, I don't know. I don't care. I've got a TV series on the go.
Do you think there are any ideologies that are sort of inherently bound up with the notion of superheroes? I mean, I'm thinking about things like the accountability or unaccountability of the individual, in that all challenges to secret identities have been successfully fought off, and it seems that that's very much entrenched.
Interesting. No, I kind of think they can represent everything, including that. So superheroes can be seen as fascists, or they can be seen as anarchists, or they can be seen as, name some things, Warren, but they're basically capable of taking on anything. I did a story in Action Comics #9. It was the idea of Superman being created as a Tulpa thought form in an alternate world. And the notion was that The sign can accommodate anything. If the Nazis had got hold of that S sign, it would mean something quite different to what it does to us. If UKIP got hold of it, if the anarchists got hold of it and wore it like Viva Vendetta masks, it would mean something again. So I think what the characters are actually, the empty signs, they can be filled with whatever the culture needs. So yes, to your question, but also everything else too. They can represent everything else on any spectrum.
So it actually just made me think of something else when you were talking about secret identities, because just what flew into my head. The one really interesting thing about 90s superhero comics, which we've all had a good time beating up, there was an interesting thing that they did completely accidentally, which is they actually removed the secret identity. The character was the character's name, the superhero name, the name you take on. None of them had secret identities. None of them had human lives. They were simply these living symbols and statements. It was 90s superhero comics, so they stood for absolutely nothing and meant nothing. They were just these wandering
90s
words. 90s values. Oh God, it's been a 90s day. I did a podcast interview this morning and we ended up talking about the 90s, that immediate post-rave indie dance.
Yeah.
Everything was orange. 90s.
Marvellous days.
Yeah, I was in this weird meeting room full with like Dayglow beanbags, and it was like being back in like a smart drugs bar in 1993.
I appreciate any comments, but especially from Sarah, on the Jamie Hewlett image that British Library is using to advertise this wonderful exhibition, the representation of gender.
Thank you for bringing that up. I was analyzing this image. I've been analyzing it for the past 2 days, as well as the rest of the space around the character. And you can't see him in this shot, but the unconscious superhero figure in the alley behind her, and all the things like the empty takeaway boxes and all the rubbish that's off to that side. And I do think that the image is both expected and subversive at the same time. That I think that it is a very post Hit Girl from Kick-Ass kind of image. And of course, because of the artist and his work on gorillas, I keep seeing this as an alternate reality version of Noodle, and it's just bizarre. But the idea of like, and it also reminds me of The Pro, if that's, in that she's like world weary, but she's also appears really young, and that she's got this really tiny outfit on, but at the same time, you get the impression that she's doing that so that you underestimate her, and then you end up like that guy in the alley behind her. But at the same time, part of me is like, I wish she had a little bit more on. But that's, yeah.
Do you feel a sort of slight shrug to the image? I mean, both these guys are saying, well, the art sort of is what the art is. I mean, do you think that's adequate as a response to the objectification of women in comics, or do you think people should be
I wouldn't
saying,
want to mischaracterise that as adequate so much as an explication, where we were bypassing genuinely important analysis.
Sorry, I didn't mean to underread you, but but I did. You put Jenny Sparks in trousers, you know.
I do think that it actually goes back to what Grant said about that the genre has expectations and limitations, and playing around with those and getting something different out of it is what makes it fun and enjoyable. And you could say the art is what the art is, but that doesn't mean that the art is always has to be that, or
Yes.
that.
Well, also, and what criticism exists for us to talk about that, but that criticism shouldn't be allowed to guide or control what the artist chooses to draw. And maybe the artist just doesn't get it, or maybe he's a totally different perspective on what the drawing represents than all of us. And I think we have to be aware of that. But criticism exists in order to say, have you thought that the drawing might represent this to people? You know, and I think that's the importance of it. But never underestimate the fact that Jamie might have had some completely different. Girl's wearing knuckle dusters, she's drinking, she obviously wants to kick fuck out of us. But yeah, so she's showing her belly button. Is that really so awful? You know, what's wrong with all our belly buttons that we can't look at them anymore? Who did this to us? So there's a lot of ways of examining and questioning imagery.
Examining is the word, because when we talk about that kind of gender representation in comics, we're actually talking about work that has gone unexamined.
Yes.
It's not being examined by Sarah.
And in addition, work that now the jet lag is starting to kick in. I just arrived from Boston yesterday.
That's when it gets interesting.
Yes. Well, it's kind of, just to, as opposed to plug, not so much plug, but use examples from my so-called secret identity, since I've been working on the most recent issue, that we have a range of different female characters in the story, and one of them in particular, who our notes describe her as a cross between Britney Spears and Supergirl, is wearing the tiny outfits. There's a bit where she is, well, will be, hasn't been drawn yet to my knowledge, practicing the Escher girl boobs and butt 90s poses in front of the mirror, that from her standpoint, that's what she believes her public wants, and that's what she wants to give them. Whereas a character like the protagonist, or Sekhmet, who had a background in theater, and she goes around this big Judge Dredd-esque shoulder pad armor kind of thing with a cape, that's not what her image is about. And
Right,
so it's like if this character...
This is not necessarily what I mean by unexamined, but unexamined by the creators as well, because when you do that, you're coming to it with a weight of political and cultural awareness, and you've got something to say.
Which might be going on with her, like that might
Which
be...
might well be going on with her, but a lot of the stuff we were talking about, particularly the 90s stuff, it wasn't necessarily being examined by the creators. So
No.
they were not necessarily even bringing any political consciousness or awareness to the work. This is simply the way things were and what you draw.
And Todd McFarlane couldn't draw feet.
There are a few artists. There was one artist who, if he had to draw feet, they were either in boots, or if he had to draw them barefoot, he would suddenly make sure that they were standing on a thick, luxurious rug that covered the foot up to the ankle. Yeah, if you
No,
can.
not Todd, Rob Liefeld did that a lot.
Yes, Dylan did that when he started out. But,
And there's
and Eddie Campbell was so
chisels.
paranoid about it, whether it needed or not, he put a pair of feet in every page he drew. He felt like he had to prove he could draw feet.
All feet comics.
Yes! And thick as pulp.
Featuring comics. I can have a couple more questions, maybe this one just there, and then this gentleman in the middle there.
Hi, the artist Matthew Stone has a wonderful phrase, the optimism as cultural rebellion. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that idea and why superheroes are appropriate for it.
Well, I mean, I've talked about this before, and because I talked about it so much, and because I got heckled about it so much, I've been really reading up on nihilism recently. And I've been totally getting into this anti-natal, you know, kind of let's just have humanity commit suicide tomorrow. So that's what my new comic books are about, because I've decided I want to embrace the whole zombie ethos that's completely overridden our culture. And I'm getting bored trying to be the single shining light in comic books. So the next stuff is just all about saying there's absolutely no fucking point.
Right. A nice warm milky drink for the audience.
No, I think that, as you know, for me, I mean, I think the only virtue that they have is their absolute unreality, and the fact that they represent things that aren't true but can at least guide us towards them and point fingers towards what if superhumanity meant not just super strength or invulnerability, but also super compassion, super creativity, super connectivity. And I think they are only worthwhile to talk about those things. So for me, it's always been the superheroes represented something that can be allowed to talk about optimistic things and a potential future for humanity, rather than the one we seem determined to create for ourselves. But they're not real, you know, they're only real as ideas, they're only real as paper things and how they make us feel.
Although now I'm thinking of that time that the Superman radio serial took on the KKK in 1948.
Man of the Fiery Cross.
Yeah, that was...
And it shut them right down, didn't it?
Well, it did bring the recruitment down quite a
No,
bit.
it certainly actually did, but I mean, even as I say, I think no matter how hard Superman tries, he can only do so much, but at least